If you see them inside, it's probably too late. Termites, that is. Notorious timber-toothed Ted and his swarm of outlaws are always on the trail to the next meal, which might just be your house. But these home wreckers are no match for Terminex, with quick draw expertise and specialized training guaranteed to protect your home. That's been the truth around here for 75 years, and it ain't gonna change. Visit TrustTerminex.com to keep these pesky outlaws dead or outside.
Hello, Duke fans, and welcome to episode 273 of the Duke Basketball Report podcast. It is Sunday, January 24th, 2021, and Duke is on a 3-game losing streak. I am unfortunately sorry to report, but we are here, regardless of the outcome of the game, to break it all down for you and hopefully shed some light. We'll see how that goes. I am your host for this episode, Sam Klein. I'm coming to you as usually I do from my home in Boston. I'm joined as always by my two partners in crime. Jason Evans is all the way down in Atlanta. Jason, how are you this morning?
Bummed because the Blue Devils lost another game. A good effort on their part, and we are here to talk about it. That's our job.
That's
Losing
it.
Streaks be damned.
Donald Wine is also here. Yeah, he's in Washington, D.C., I believe.
I am. And you know what, guys? I know we're going to be talking about some bad news, but I want to start with some good news, at least for me. As you guys know, I went to Detroit Country Day, same high school that Shane went to. We both know each other from high school. Our state championship football team, congratulations to you. For the first time since I was a senior in high school, Detroit Country Day won the football state championship in Michigan, won on Friday night. Blanked out every single opponent since they restarted a few weeks ago. They took an 8-week break because of COVID shutting everything in Michigan down. They came back, and they have not allowed a point since then, all the way to victory. It's the first time they have won, again, since 1999. So congrats to Coach Mack. Congrats to my man, Coach Mann, who coached me in high school at track. And they have sons now who are leading their team to the state championship. So congrats to them. Country Day Yellow Jackets, we're back. We're number one.
Wow. I can't believe we have good sports news today. This is
we had to lead
incredible.
With that. We had to.
Donald, thank you so much for that, because now we're going to spend, I don't know how long, talking about Duke's loss to Louisville, which occurred yesterday at the KFC Yum Center. It was a 70-65 loss. Probably the best that Duke has looked in its last couple of losses. Unfortunately, it's 3 in a row now, but it is still a loss. Duke drops to even 5-5 on the season and 3-3 in conference play. Things are not looking good for Duke at this moment, but I want to start with the headlines before we get into the nitty-gritty details. So, Jason Evans, I'll come to you first. Give me your headline from this game.
Different story, but same ending.
All
Short,
right, and
sweet,
Donald,
and simple, and that sums up the game, doesn't it?
I think that says it perfectly. Donald, what about yours?
Mine is effort improves in close loss, but close only counts in horseshoes.
Ooh, there you go. I had everything but the win for Duke.
Yeah,
in this one.
I think that's pretty accurate.
I think we all summed up something very similar. So I mentioned at the top, it was a close loss for Duke, but one where it just got away from them at the end. A few guys missed 3-pointers with time expiring, and Carlick Jones from Louisville, who we told you about in the preview, he was a monster for them down the stretch. So let's start with the good news, because we like to do that first before we get into the bad. Donald, I'll come to you first. Tell me about your good news from this game. What did you see that gave you hope looking forward?
I think I alluded to it in my headline. The effort was way markedly improved than it has been the last few games. The energy, especially, we talk about the fact that we have slow starts in the first half to start the game. We didn't have that. It was, I thought we matched their intensity very well. We matched the energy of Louisville very well. It was back and forth. The biggest lead on either side was Louisville was up 6 in the second half. We were up 3 at one point. It just kept going back and forth. 18 lead changes, 9 ties. They were fighting the whole game. You could tell that they were fighting the whole game. Wendell Moore, and I know Jason was on the post game presser. We'll talk about that in a little bit, but I know Wendell said in the presser that the crowd was the biggest that they had been in front of all year, and that they kind of fed off that. He said that Louisville probably fed off it too, but they were like, extra excited to play in front of people. And we've talked about
by the way, 3,200 people. They had 3,000 people there. That's crazy.
That's maybe. I mean, the Yum Center is pretty big. Yum Center, I think, is 21,000 or something like that. So it's still socially distant, but that's still a lot of fans given where we're at right now. But I think they fed off of that, and you could tell that they wanted to come in and kind of silence the crowd. And for the most part, the crowd wasn't really in it. They were there. You could tell after Louisville scored that there was cheers, but it wasn't like the momentum led them to victory. Our guys fed off of that very well, and I was very pleased with the effort that they had. It's one of those things where before you're like, man, if we had half the effort, we would have won. Now it's like, man, we had the effort. It was there. We just had some mistakes, and we had some things that didn't go our way that we'll talk about. And that's really the difference in this game. But the energy was there. I like seeing that, and I hope that continues because we need to bottle that up and bring it back to Cameron on Tuesday night.
I think that energy comment is huge. And yeah, the fact that Duke was able to feed off a crowd, even a small crowd, is something that at least gives you a little bit of encouragement that, look, maybe it's just that the situation in which they're playing this year is making it tough for a bunch of guys who committed to a school, mostly thinking, if nothing else, I'm going to be playing in front of raucous crowds at every game that I attend, be it in Cameron Indoor where they're for me or on the road where they're against me. Jason Evans, tell me about your good news from this game.
So I asked Wendell Moore in the post game. Donald alluded to the fact that Wendell was the player that came out and spoke to Wendell and Matthew Hurt both spoke to the media. But I actually specifically asked Wendell if Duke had done anything different in this game to in preparation so that we would get off to a good start. And he said they hadn't. He said they just came out and brought the effort that that they talk about doing every single game. I actually pressed him on. I was like, come on, man, really? Nothing? You guys did nothing differently? Because it was a very markedly different start to the game. I mean, it seems sort of crazy to be excited about the fact that Duke was only down 10-5 and to be excited that it was a 1-2 possession game for virtually the entire game. But given where Duke has been lately, we'll take it. This was good that Duke was in there the whole contest. I mean, that's sort of how far the team has fallen, but I think it's absolutely good news that they showed effort, that they were competitive with a good team throughout the entire game. Speaking of Wendell, I think he's getting closer and closer to being the player that we expected him to be. He clearly has his confidence back, and along with Matthew Hurt, I mean, I kind of think that Wendell Moore is somewhat becoming somewhat indispensable for this team because of his ability to play in a lot of different ways, cause a lot of different problems for the opposition on both offense and defense. We don't have many guys who are contributing on both ends of the floor the way Wendell is. And I love him at the top of our zone with his length, using his length in the zone. And I thought that was very effective for Duke early in the game. I wish we would have seen some zone late in the game when Carlick Jones was carving us up late in that game. I just wish we would have thrown a zone at him. I mean, if you recall, Carlick Jones had a ton of points in the second half, almost no points in the first half. Duke played a bunch of zone in the first half, almost no zone in the second half. I sort of feel like when Carlick Jones was destroying us, I think we should have thrown zone at him just to give him something different to look at, because we said in the preview that I remember saying it. He's the best pick and roll player in the ACC, and he was killed us on the pick and roll. But anyway, back to the good. I do want to mention Joey Baker. Joey hit a three. It was good just to see him hit one. Yes, he went back to missing them again after he hit one, but we know he can be incredibly potent from out there, and seeing the ball go through the basket is just so important for him. I am certain he is going to explode some game, and Joey is making a difference in other ways other than being a shooter. I mean, he's still getting plenty of playing time, even though he's not shooting particularly well right now. That is such a difference from the Joey Baker we've seen in years past. So I think that is incredibly great news. And I am certain, I will put money on it right now that Joey Baker's going to have a game where he hits 3+ 3-pointers and is like player of the game sometime in the next 10 games. I'm sure of it because he's just too good a shooter not to have that happen.
I feel great about that prediction too, Jason. I feel like Joey Baker's just got, there's just a little bit still missing for him to have that breakout. And I agree with you that I think it's coming before the end of the season. You mentioned Wendell Moore, who is seems to be coming along at both ends of the court. I want to look on the offensive side and tell you that my good news from this game is Matthew Hurt, who continues to be the best player for Duke. Jalen Johnson probably has more upside and more potential than Matthew Hurt does. But in this season, Matthew Hurt is the best player for the Blue Devils, and he showed it again, I think, on offense yesterday against Louisville. 9 for 13 from the field and 4 for 5 from 3. That is an incredible performance that you will duplicate anytime. And honestly, the only bad thing is that he got into foul trouble and then fouled out at the end of the game, forcing other guys to have to take those final shots when you would have preferred to see Matthew Hurt taking them, because he's just been automatic for Duke this year, and especially so in the last few games. It's a shame that it's being overshadowed by the fact that Duke is losing. So yeah, I'm really excited about Matt Hurt, and as much as we heard about him in the offseason and then in the preseason about how much he's improved, it really feels like it's coming to fruition for him right now.
Yeah, and the thing about him and Jalen Johnson is when Jalen is good, Jalen's the best player on the team. But when Jalen is not good, when Jalen's just having an average game for himself, Matthew Hurt is unquestionably the best player on the team, and Matthew Hurt's the only guy on the team who's consistent at this point. And consistency, is it time for us to get to the mushrooms, the veggies, the autoplay videos? Consistency is just killing this team.
Yeah, that's the key. Consistency right there. That's why he's been, arguably the best player in the ACC. Justin Champagnie is probably the front runner at this point, and Matt Hurt is right behind him. It's because he is consistently, even when he has a bad game like he did the other day against Pitt, he still has like 13 and 6. So like if a bad game is 13 and 6, you're pretty consistently offering something to the table every single night.
It's surprising to me still how quiet it feels the way that Matt Hurt, puts up numbers. I think there's a lot of guys on this team that want to be scoring more and want to be moving the ball around more, but Hurt's the one who's actually getting it done. So I think that's my good news from this game. We'll move to the autoplay videos portion of the recap, the bad news from this game. Donald, I'll let you go first. Tell me about the bad news that you saw from this game. And I think there's a few different places you could start.
Yeah, well, I will start with one that I think is just the biggest elephant in the room, if we will. Over the last 4 games, Duke opponents have shot 101 free throws, and Duke has attempted just 53. That is a net minus of 48 for Duke. Yesterday, we were 7 for 9 from the line. Louisville was 18 for 24. They made twice as many field free throws as we attempted. That's usually a stat, and Coach talked about it. That's usually a stat that we do. We usually make more than the other team attempts. We've talked about it. We talked about it against Pitt. We talked about it against Virginia Tech. This is something that has become a serious issue. And Coach K spent a lot of time talking about it in his press conference. And Jason will elaborate on some of that a little bit later. But the fact that we can't get to the line and the fact that we're sending them to the line, I mean, they were in the bonus, I think, before the under 12 timeout in the second half. That is a problem. And it's not necessarily where it's not because necessarily we're being overly aggressive or anything. We have to evaluate why we're sending them to the line. And conversely, on offense, we're not being as aggressive and putting ourselves in positions where all they can do to stop us is foul. They're not checking us on open threes, and they're not checking us inside the paint because sometimes we miss even open bunnies. These are things that Duke needs to evaluate in the next couple of days.
Yeah, let me talk a little bit about the free throws for a second. And like you said, Coach K talked about it in the postgame news conference. He said he's never had a team that shot so few free throws. And he said we need to look at whether we're using our hands too much on defense because we're fouling too much. And he was very clear. He was not blaming the refs. I don't think there's anyone out there who thinks that the refs are consistently jobbing Duke.
TV Teddy was actually fine yesterday.
Yeah.
He the biggest calls didn't come from him, which is
he needs a bigger crowd. To really get into the full Ted Valentine.
He's a preseason TV mode. So
yeah, but But like Carlick Jones specifically drew 10 fouls this game. There were 10 times we were guarding Carlick Jones and we fouled him. Duke committed 23 fouls to only 15 for Louisville. And, Donald, like you said, we've heard for years that Duke is the team that makes more free throws than our opponents attempt. This year, our opponents have made 145 free throws and Duke has shot 147. So basically this year, the script is completely flipped on that. It's kind of unbelievable to see that from a Duke team. And both Louisville and Pittsburgh, our past two losses, the two games we lost this week that I think are very frustrating for a lot of Duke fans. In both of those games, Louisville and Pitt each took 15 more free throws than Duke did. 15 more free throws. It is really tough to win a game when you're sending a team to the line 15 more times than you get to the line, because free throws are easy points. Most teams are hitting 7 out of 10, So 15 more times, they're getting what? They're getting a 10 extra points on you. That is really, really hard to overcome.
On the offensive side, for the bad news, the other stat that I wanted to highlight, Duke only had 7 assists yesterday in a game where and you could see that the way they were playing, a lot of ball stopping, and I've talked about the last few games how I want to see more ball movement. I want to see Duke able to just, even if it's just swinging it around the perimeter more. That would at least feel like there's a little bit more movement in the offense and a little bit more to try to keep the defense on their heels rather than on their toes. I think that element from Duke has been missing entirely.
Hey, Sam, I hate to do it. I hate to be the guy who calls out a specific player, but Jeremy Roach has got to get better at this. Jeremy Roach is a huge ball stopper. When a pass comes, first of all, he dribbles too much. When a pass comes to him, he waits to decide what to do with it. And he has got to be a faster decision maker. The ball has got to move quicker. Duke is really, really easy to guard right now. Duke struggles to score because other than Matthew Hurt getting, those turnarounds and stuff like that, and other than us, maybe getting something on a fast break in the half court offense, we are very predictable. We are very slow, and we don't create opportunities for easy shots.
And I think, honestly, I won't call him out specifically because I think it's not something that is unique to him. I think you were right in assessing what he's been doing, but I don't think that's just him doing that, because we saw a lot of times yesterday where the ball would come down, especially in transition. It'd come down and all of a sudden it wasn't like we would stop to set up an offense. We would stop to force a bad pass and on ourselves, and we would sit there and wait for an angle to disappear and then throw the ball, as opposed to trying to make the impossible possible by throwing a ball through like 5 people to try and find someone under the basket. Those things have been happening in games before, and you saw it a little bit yesterday. And when people get frustrated, they try to do it more because it's just like the shooter's mentality. The next pass is going to go through. The next guy is going to hit the open jumper, and it just compounds itself. And yesterday, it wasn't like it compounded itself in a bad way where the game mushroomed out of control. They were still able to keep it within reason and keep it within control, but it definitely killed us on several possessions where we could have taken the lead.
The thing I want to see on that front is just a more simplified offense, because I think Duke is, as you guys have said, they're trying to do too much. Be it Jeremy Roach or guys looking for Matt Hurt because they know that he's making baskets, be it DJ Stewart driving the ball to the hole and not necessarily having a plan for it. I mean, there's a lot of different ways that this could improve for Duke. I just want them to have a little bit better court vision, be looking around for guys and create more movement. Jason, give me your thoughts. I think I may have skipped you on directly addressing your bad news for this game, but tell me if you've got any more bad news before we move on and look ahead.
Sure. So there are a couple things. Boy, I wish I had less in this category and more in the first category. But let's be honest. Let's keep it honest. So first of all, I want to mention something. Duke's ranking in Ken Pomeroy, in the advanced metrics, just keeps on dropping. We are now down to number 32. And the reason to note it is not the absolute number. Obviously, everyone knows Duke is struggling. Everyone knows that Duke has played its way into being a bubble team at best at the moment, and that we've got to get some wins. But this was yet another game where Duke's ranking fell after the game, with the exception of the Notre Dame game. Duke's Ken Pom ranking has fallen after every single game we played this year. Every game, whatever the expectation was for us, We failed to meet it, and so we got knocked down a little notch as a result. Duke failed to cover the spread again. Duke is now 1-9 against the spread this season. And again, not that I care from a gambling standpoint, but I care from the standpoint of Duke meeting expectations. And yes, the expectations for Duke are always high, but you got to have some games where you meet those expectations, don't you? I mean, whew. And then I want to talk about the end of the game. At the 4:55 mark, Matthew Hurt made a difficult jump shot. It basically, from that moment till the end of the game, the final 5 minutes of the game, Duke got 2 free throws from DJ Stewart, and we got a bucket in the lane by Jalen Johnson at the very, very end. That's it. At winning time, we could not get a basket. And in the post-game news conference, Coach K lamented the basketball gods for not letting the open three-pointers fall. I mean, we got wide open, really good threes from DJ Stewart and Joey Baker, our 2 best shooters. And both those shots missed. And Coach K talked about, he was especially upset for Joey because he said Joey's been working so hard and Joey deserved to have that three-pointer fall. If Joey Baker's three-pointer falls, it was not the one to tie. DJ Stewart had the one to tie. Joey had one that would have given Duke the lead in the final minute of the game. It would have been huge and could not have been a better look. So frustrating.
This is where the second half of my headline comes in, because on that possession, after the game was over, I text regularly with some of my best friends from college, from my freshman dorm. And I was like, man, like it was Stewart's shot. The second shot was like, felt like it was 3/4 of the way down and then rolled back out. And my friend goes, well, almost only counts in horseshoes and hand grenades. I'm like, yeah. And that's the thing, is we were almost there. We almost had everything put together. We almost had enough energy to win. We almost made that basket. Almost doesn't count in these games. When you look back, they're going to show a loss and they're not going to show the almost. And I think the guys definitely deserved to win. They played well enough to win, and it just didn't happen. And I think that's more demoralizing than playing with no effort and losing. Playing with effort and losing is way more demoralizing.
And by the way, I mean, look, maybe we just have to accept that we're a woefully bad three-point shooting team. I don't think we are. God, remember guys in the preseason, we were hearing about guys hitting threes, and we thought this was going to be a really good three-point shooting team. But Duke is now hitting less than a third of our three-pointers. And aside from Matthew Hurt, who's hitting an otherworldly 47%, Matthew Hurt's at 47% on his threes. We have 4 other guys on the team who average more than 2 3-point field goal attempts per game. So these are the guys who are shooting it. And none of those other 4 guys are hitting more than 32% of their three-pointers. Do you guys know who's the second best three-point shooter on the team
DJ
after
Stewart.
Matthew Hurt? No. It's Jordan
Not even
Goldwire.
off the top of my head, yeah.
It's
Goldwire.
Jordan Goldwire. In terms of guys who take at least 2 3-pointers a game, Jordan Goldwire hits 32% of his threes. DJ Stewart's only hitting 30%. Wendell Moore's hitting 26%, and Jeremy Roach is hitting 23.5%. And I'll tell you something. There are plenty of almost every moment of the game, you have Jeremy Roach and Jordan Goldwire on the floor. You know, they're on the floor together a lot. When those 2 guys, who are both clearly reluctant to shoot from the perimeter, when those guys are on the floor together, it is really tough for Duke to get spacing, because I think the opposing team sloughs off of them and clogs the lane. And it is really, I don't know what the solution is, because they're both very good players, and I think they both need to be playing. But when those 2 guys are in the game together, Duke can't get spacing.
When Jordan Goldwire is in the game, especially when it's Jeremy Roach, there was a point, I think, in the second half that Jordan Goldwire was in the game. And when we had the possession on offense, I checked to see where people were in relation to Jordan Goldwire. There was no defender within 10 feet of him at any point on offense, because they were like, go ahead, shoot it. And I think they even talked about it on the broadcast, where as he's shooting a 3 and missing it, they're like, yeah, they're going to let him take that shot, because, it's clear that he's not going to do it. So that's something that we talked about last year with Jordan Goldwire.
And he's the best he's the best perimeter 3-point shooter other than Matthew Hurt on the team.
And we talked about this last year, and there was a point at the end of last year, before everything got suspended and canceled, that he started to get it together and he started to hit those threes and make people at least check him a little bit. And that opened up the floor for so much. We need one of these guys to do the same. Matthew Hurt, Matthew Hurt going out to the perimeter hitting a three, that's not going to change anyone's defense. But if DJ Stewart, Jeremy Roach, or Jordan Goldwire, if one of those guys can come in and start knocking down threes, it'll make everything flow a little bit differently because the defense will have to check them, and that'll open up so much more space.
You know what's funny about you, Jason, bringing up the 3-point shooting is that as I was watching this game, one of the things I sort of note my visceral reaction or my top of mind reaction as I'm watching and sort of thinking about like, oh, the ball's moving around this way. What am I feeling as that's happening? Basically every time that Duke takes a three, not by Matthew Hurt at this point in the season, my immediate physical reaction is, well, that's the end of the possession. Like, and it's totally subconscious. It's not like I'm realizing that it's happening, but I see Duke take a three. And in years past, when Duke is a better 3-point shooting team, it's Duke's taking a three. And I feel hopeful that Duke is about to make the shot and that they're going to get 3 points. I now have this physical reaction. Like, that's it. The possession's over. Whoever it was other than Matthew Hurt took the shot. The ball's going the other way and Duke's not going to get 3 points. So it feels like it sort of invaded my mind at this point. I wanted to bring up, since you guys were talking so much about the shooting, to remind you about the stats game, and wanted to ask you guys who, if you remember, who did you pick for being, and by the way, this is not self-serving, so I'm not giving away the answer. Who did each of you think was going to be the best 3-point shooter on the team at the beginning of the season? Do you know?
I definitely said Joey Baker.
Definitely.
I think I said Roach.
Donald?
I think I said Roach.
You said Roach and I said Joey Baker. So we are currently getting crushed in that spot. Do you remember who each of you picked as having the highest field goal percentage this season?
Mark Williams.
Yeah, I think I had Mark Williams.
Yeah, both of you had Mark Williams and I had Matthew Hurt. That's not really working out for any of us either at this moment. I'm actually closer than the two of you are to winning that category. So
is Jalen Johnson leading the team in field goal?
Jalen Johnson is slightly leading Matthew Hurt. Henry Coleman's actually ahead of both of them, but I think we would probably throw him out for not having enough field goal attempts.
By the way, Henry played significant minutes yesterday. Henry was early in the rotation yesterday. He was ahead of Jamin Brakefield in the rotation. I'm glad for Henry. We know he's a guy who is killing it in practice. And he didn't do very much. He almost had a 4 trillion. I mean, does getting a foul avoid getting you a trillion?
Yes.
A foul avoids the trillion.
That appears in the stat sheet.
So he didn't have a 4. Is that a 4 trillion and 1? But I'm glad Henry got some minutes, and I still have high hopes for him.
A few weeks too late for all of our enthusiasm for him, but yeah, it would be nice if he could round it out here and be effective. Hey, look, Justin Robinson did that for Duke last year. Who's to say that Henry Coleman can't be that guy this year? Exactly. I did want to round out this discussion on the Louisville game and hand it to Jason, who was able to dial into the Coach K press conference after the game. I wanted to ask you, Jason, about the kind of weird exchange that Coach K had with the Chronicle reporter and wanted us to discuss that really quickly. I don't want to harp on it for too long, but what happened and what was your kind of take on it watching it live?
Well, so I think the first thing we should do, let's just go ahead and play the exchange, both the question. Jake Piazza is the name of the Chronicle reporter. He's been on a number of these post-game and player interviews. There are sort of a couple different reporters for the Chronicle who covered Duke who show up on these things. So Jake is the name of the reporter. He gets called on, and you'll go ahead, you'll hear Coach K's response to Jake's question.
Hi, Coach. I'm just curious as to what the next step forward here is for the team as you guys move into another week of basketball.
Yeah, why don't we just evaluate this game? I'm not into what our next step forward is right now. We just finished a hard-fought game. I don't know if, what's your major? What's your major at Duke? What's your hardest class?
Econ.
Okay. So say you just had the toughest econ test in the world, and when you walked out, somebody asked you, what's your next step? You see what I mean? You have some empathy and just give us time to evaluate this game, and then we'll figure out, just like we always try to do, what the next step will be. The next step, obviously, is to prepare for Georgia Tech. How we prepare for them, that's what we're going to have to figure out.
So I'm a journalist, as you guys know. In addition to doing this, in addition to covering Duke basketball, I work for CNN, and I think I want to say right off the bat that what Coach K did not treat Jake Piazza with the respect that Jake deserves. I think it was strange and demeaning to sort of ask him about his major, and I get that Coach K was trying to make a comparison there. To taking an exam. I understand where Coach K was going with it, but it felt very weird. I will tell you that you saw a number of faces. The news conferences are on Zoom, obviously, and I have my Zoom setting so that I could see all the other reporters who were on it with me, in addition to seeing Coach K. And you saw a number of the reporters sort of, furrow their brow a little bit, like, "Ooh, is he really going here? Is he doing this?" I know that Duke wants to treat the Chronicle reporters like the paid media, the folks who are working press. I thought Coach K did not treat Jake like the way he would have treated a regular reporter there, and I think that is unfortunate. That said, it's kind of a sort of a BS question. It's a stupid question because it's not one that's going to elicit anything of a meaningful response. I mean, I really wanted to ask Coach K, why didn't you go back to the zone when Carlick Jones was carving you up? I mean, for the final 7 minutes of the game, you didn't play any zone, and you just sat there and watched Carlick Jones pick and roll you to death again and again and again and again. How come you did not make any adjustment to it? I never got a chance to ask that question because Jake Piazza was asking Coach K, where do you go from here? Which is just such obvious...
So Jason's now gonna call out Coach K for being mean to the reporter and the reporter for asking bad questions. So
he's he's an equal opportunity hater.
Yeah,
Jason's coming in here just to ruin everyone.
I will say I thought the questions, whatever, right? You get those questions a lot, and coaches probably gotten a billion of them over the years. One, I will say I have seen him treat Chronicle reporters way worse.
Oh yeah,
last night. I mean, way worse, to the point where like, yo, coach, like you need to calm down. But this one last night, I think the analogy in itself should have just been the answer. He didn't have to kind of guilt trip him into it. All you had to do is say,
layer on the whole, like, what's your major thing?
Yo, basketball's like an exam, and after exam, you just kind of evaluate how you did in the exam. You don't look forward to the next one. You just kind of say, you turn in your paper and you say, coach, your professor, how did I do? You don't ask him, so when's the next one? And he could have done that. It would have been fine. I think the rest of it was just kind of piling on a little bit. But
there are ways to
do that sometimes.
There are ways to do it where you don't sort of embarrass the reporter. And I think, and look, I get it. Coach K is frustrated. There's no question. Yeah. I'll tell you, one of the reasons I did not get to ask my question, Coach K usually, he gives us an opening statement and he usually takes a bunch of questions. He took like 3 questions and then he was like, and then they were like, okay, Coach K's done. I don't know if they sensed that maybe the Chronicle thing was going to be something. If maybe the Duke Sports Information folks, Mike DeGeorge, we love you, Mike. I don't know if Mike DeGeorge maybe sensed, this is not the time to have Coach K answer more questions.
Yeah, coming on the heels of a third straight loss and one where Duke clearly could have won the game and didn't, and you could Mike DeGeorge could probably see Mike Krzyzewski coming into the media availability space and being like, this is not going to be good. So I bet I wouldn't be surprised if he was ready to pull the plug early on that regardless.
Knowing where the press room is in relation to the locker room, he probably didn't have to see it. He probably heard it.
Ooh, good point.
It was at Louisville.
Doesn't matter. In a lot of places, the media room is right next to the locker room, so they don't have to, spend 5 minutes walking through the halls to get to wherever they just want to get in and get out. So usually he's right next to us. So they probably could hear what was going on.
And before the post-game press conferences, the coaches always go into the locker room before they come out for that. So you can kind of get anyone that's sort of in the backstage area, not even where the press is, but back in the dressing room area, those people really know kind of what the raw emotion is before you get the somewhat filtered version that comes to the press.
And I do want to say this to Jake Piazza. Jake, if you're out there listening, welcome to the club, man, because Coach K has eviscerated many reporters way worse than he did to you. It is a badge of honor, I think. I myself have been in a Duke postgame news conference and had Coach K just tear me a new one for what he thought was a stupid question. It was a perfectly reasonable question. As folks will recall, I asked Coach K about the rotation, and he got mad. He was like, "We don't have a rotation," and I had to rephrase the question as I had to ask him about our depth. Coach K sometimes just decides, I'm kind of sick of the media right now, and I think after losing 3 in a row, he's a little sick of the media.
So, as we've now said too many times, Duke is on a 3-game losing streak, but we must look ahead. Duke plays Georgia Tech on Tuesday night. We are going to break that down right after this break. All right, guys, we are back. And as I mentioned before the break, Duke is playing Georgia Tech this week. The Yellow Jackets are coming off a loss to Virginia, but prior to that, they had actually been on a bit of a roll. They had beaten Jason's favorite Clemson team last week. So Georgia Tech looking a little stronger, I think, than folks expected. Hopefully, we're looking at a good game that Duke is able to pull a victory out of. Jason, I'll come to you first. Tell me what you see on the advanced stats about Georgia Tech and what we can expect from them.
Yeah, this is a pretty good offensive team, this Georgia Tech team. That's the biggest thing to take away from this. They're a very good 3-point shooting team. And as you know, Duke is not great at defending the 3. Georgia Tech hits more than 38% of their threes. That's top 30 in the country. And as a result, they are very, very, they have a very high effective field goal percentage. They also do not turn the ball over very much at all. Only 16% of their possessions end up in a turnover. That is really good. Again, about top 30 in the country. And as a result of being good from 3 and not having many turnovers, Georgia Tech has a top 40 offense in the land. They are a very, very experienced team. They play, a lot of guys who are juniors and seniors. Almost their entire roster is guys who are juniors and seniors. They really don't have any freshmen that they're putting out there. And in this crazy pandemic year, that is that's a really important thing to have on your side. You mentioned they blew Clemson out. That they beat North Carolina. They even the game they lost, this weekend. They lost to Virginia. They only lost by 2 points at Virginia. That's a really, really, as quality losses go, that's an outstanding quality loss. So this Georgia Tech team will present some real problems for Duke. In terms of where we can attack them, they're bad at defending the 3. I talked about them being really good at shooting it. They're almost as bad at defending it as they are at shooting it. They give up 38% on 3-pointers on this season. Which is a really, really big number. So maybe they are a team that Duke can get healthy against from the perimeter. Goodness knows we really, really need to. And then the other thing to mention about their defense is maybe one of the reasons they're bad at defending the 3 is that they go for the steal. This is a great team at stealing the ball. Almost 13%, 12.8% of possessions against Georgia Tech result in Georgia Tech getting a steal. That is outstanding. Top 10 in the country. So the way to characterize Georgia Tech is good shooting team, takes care of the ball really well, that gets a ton of steals, but is vulnerable from the perimeter. Duke has got to take advantage of the vulnerability there. Otherwise, we're playing a super experienced team that is playing really good basketball right now. And this 3-game losing streak could easily become 4 against a Georgia Tech team that, remember in the preseason, I was touting Georgia Tech as one of the teams that I thought was going to rise. Georgia Tech and Clemson were 2 of the teams that I thought were going to rise up from the middle of the ACC pack toward the front of the pack, to challenge the top tier of the ACC. For a little while, it looked like maybe Georgia Tech wasn't there. Lately, it looks like they're absolutely there as one of the most experienced teams in the ACC. They are. It's going to be a tough game for Duke.
Donald, Jason mentioned the last few games for Georgia Tech. They also had some postponements, so their schedule has been a little bit wonky this month. What have you seen from them from the past few games that you think stands out?
Well, Jason mentioned that he thought at the beginning of the season when we did our ACC preview that they were one of the teams that could rise to the middle of the pack. I picked Virginia Tech as well. We were kind of talking about those 2 teams being the highest risers along with Clemson in the ACC. But they didn't start out that way. They started out by losing to Georgia State, which is their little brother in Atlanta, not in Georgia, in Atlanta. They lost to them in 4 OTs to start the season. Then they turned right around and lost to Mercer by 10. So, but they also beat Kentucky when that win meant something. It doesn't mean anything anymore. But they kind of started the whole, domino effect for Kentucky. And like you mentioned, they've had close losses to UVA. They beat Wake, they beat UNC, they just beat Clemson last week. I think when it comes to Georgia Tech, the issue about their experience is not really an issue, but the issue about their experience is that they rely on it a lot. They don't rely on their bench at all. You think our bench minutes are terrible? Their bench minutes are terrible. They're 340th in bench minutes. They only use 18.2% of their minutes come from the bench. That's even worse than Duke. They are 4th in experience in the entire country, though. And so what that is that experience, that consistency, those things that we haven't found yet this season, they have been using that, especially this last couple of weeks. Like Jason said, just losing to Virginia is a pretty good loss. They had a couple of chances to win it there. Beating Clemson before that in the middle of the week, that is a really good win for them. That's going to help them move forward. And really what it comes down to this, Duke is back home. We had 3 straight losses on the road. The last time we had 3 straight losses was 2016. So, but we saw that energy. We saw that excitement. We saw that, just competitive edge that we had been missing. Can they take what they did in that area from the Yum Center and bring it back to Cameron and put it towards this game? That's what I'm looking forward to seeing, because Georgia Tech is going to bring it. They haven't beat Duke in Cameron in quite a while. They want to be back on top. Duke wants to get back on the winning column, take that energy, bottle it, bring it back. Let's see if they can do that Tuesday.
Looking at Georgia Tech's players specifically, the thing that really stands out, I think, to me, is that they don't play a very deep lineup. The guys that they do play, as Jason mentioned, are great shooters. There's a lot of good shooting on this team. So Duke is going to have to defend a bunch of different guys from beyond the arc. But Georgia Tech does not play a deep bench. So maybe Duke can get them into foul trouble, and that might help. They've got a starting lineup that all play over 28 minutes a game, and there's only 2 other guys on the team that are averaging even more than 10 minutes a game. So I wanted to talk you guys through a couple of the key starters for Georgia Tech. Their most efficient player is not their biggest scorer, but their most efficient player is Michael DeVoe. Duke fans are probably familiar with him, as they are going to be with basically the rest of the Georgia Tech starting lineup, because they're all juniors and seniors, as Jason said before. DeVoe's averaging 14 points, 4 boards, and 3 assists a game, and shooting 42% from 3. 42% from 3. That's awesome. He's not the only guy that does that. Jose Alvarado is a senior and also shoots 42% from 3. He's averaging 17 points a game with 3 rebounds and 4 assists. So these are 2 guys that really fill up the stat sheet and are kind of leading the way for Georgia Tech. Another big scorer for them is Moses Wright. He's the big man. He gets the most rebounds, 6.5 rebounds a game, and also averaging 17 a game. So this is a team that among those guys, all of them can score, and they're very impressive. The last guy that I think is important for them is Jordan Usher, the only other guy that's scoring in double figures, 11 points a game and 5 rebounds with 3 assists. He's another big man. So Usher and Wright are the guys down low, DeVoe and Jose Alvarado from the perimeter. And then the starting lineup is rounded out with Bubba Parham. He's not quite as effective on the stat sheet. Pretty good defender for them. So that's the starting lineup for Georgia Tech. Those are the guys you're going to see most often during this game. And as I said, Duke fans, if you've seen Duke play the last few years, you're probably familiar with all of these players, because none of them seem to go anywhere. They're all juniors and seniors. They're very experienced, and I think that Duke is going to have its hands full on Tuesday, even though they're back in Cameron Indoor, because I don't think we've talked about how little consistency there's been for Duke this year. This Georgia Tech team is consistent, even when they're losing a close game to Virginia. They've been pretty good here the last month and a half, and it's going to be a tough one for Duke to win on Tuesday night.
Really quick, I just wanted to mention, Sam, you mentioned Jordan Usher, sort of their other big man. This is someplace where I think Duke may try and take a little bit of advantage of things, because Jordan Usher he plays more like a guard. He's 6'7", but not like really bulky and strong. And he is, their second biggest player on the floor to Moses Wright. Moses Wright is a big guy, but I think you may see Duke try to take advantage of the fact that Georgia Tech is basically playing 4 guards around one center for the most part. All the guys you mentioned, other than Moses Wright, would prefer to be on the perimeter on offense and frankly on defense as well. So maybe that's a place where Duke gets to take advantage of things. Either Jalen Johnson or Matthew Hurt will have Jordan Usher on them for the most part, and I'm hopeful that Duke can figure out a way to take advantage of that matchup, because there are not a lot of matchups that favor Duke here, because this Georgia Tech team is experienced, and as a result, they are men playing against Duke's boys.
I do unfortunately think that the matchups overall favor Georgia Tech in this game. Not that their players are much more talented than Duke, but as you noted, experience really counts for something when it's juniors and seniors against predominantly freshmen and sophomores for Duke. So it's going to be tough. ESPN is saying that Duke is favored in this game. Duke is still considered a slightly better team according to Ken Pom, but the results for Georgia Tech recently have been pretty stellar. So I'm personally worried about this game for Duke. And let's not forget the context here that Duke is currently on its way trending down. They're back to 500 on the season, both across their whole record and in ACC play. So really hope that the Duke doesn't end up below 500 after this game. So guys, we'll move on to some parting shot notes and our Player of the Week awards. Not a fun week to be handing out the Player of the Week, but we're going to do it anyway. So on the parting shot front, I know that Donald had a couple of notes for us that he wanted to highlight. Why don't you go ahead with those, Donald, and then we'll get to the Player of the Week.
Yeah, so the first one I wanted to quickly notice a congratulations to Gene Banks. Gene Banks, a Duke legend, was named the AD, the athletic director at Gaston College, which is in Dallas, North Carolina. Not Dallas, Texas, Dallas, North Carolina. Now, this is a junior college that has not had an athletics program in 50 years. So they're trying to reboot the program, all the athletic programs, and they started by hiring Gene Banks as the athletic director. So congratulations to him. I will say one of his first hires was Dickie Nutt. Now, you may have heard this name before. Dickie Nutt is going to be the associate athletic director. He's going to be the head basketball coach. He was the former coach at Arkansas State and was also an assistant at Florida State under Leonard Hamilton. Leonard Hamilton is the person who kind of linked him to Gene Banks into Gaston College and recommended Dickie Nutt for the job because Leonard Hamilton played ball at Gaston College. I don't know if you guys knew this, but from 1966 to 1968, before they canceled their entire athletic department, they had a guy by Leonard Hamilton playing ball for them before he finished his ball at University of Tennessee Martin. So that is an interesting link from not just Duke, but from the rest of the ACC. Also, Leonard Hamilton, timeless. No one here thinks that he played ball in 1966 at all, unless it was middle school. So, but congratulations to Gene Banks. Congratulations to him for helping to reboot this program and really just, starting small, but really growing. And hopefully this leads to a lot of success for them on the junior college front.
If Beavis and Butthead were here, we would be laughing about the name Dickie Nutt, but we will not laugh about it.
I wasn't going to say it, but Jason did. So let's just remember that I am actually the youngest person on the show. Jason is in spirit the youngest person on this program.
Right.
So in case anyone's concerned about that. And Donald, you also had a note for us about a new wrinkle that the NCAA brought out this week related to being able to play in the tournament. What was that?
Yeah, and it's something that came up on the broadcast last night, and I wouldn't have heard about it unless, Jay and Dan were talking about it. And so I think you guys caught it around the same time I did. And the wrinkle is that the NCAA is requiring all teams that participate in the bubbles that are in and around Indianapolis, they have to test negative. Everyone on the team has to test negative 7 days in a row before they can go to the NCAA tournament. So there's two things that I think we need to hone in here. The first one is this. If you're a team that is clearly in, like a Gonzaga or a Baylor, right? If you're clearly in the tournament, then why go through the conference tournament and risk damaging your seeding or anything like that? You don't need it. You're going to be in. You might as well just opt out of your conference tournament. Now, the other issue is if you are a team that is on the bubble, needing a signature win in your conference tournament, usually that's the time you get it. People like to upset, the Dukes and the Kansases and the Kentuckys of the world in previous years to try and put that on their resume for Selection Sunday and get off of the bubble and into the NCAA tournament. But if those big teams are going to opt out, there's fewer of those games left. There's fewer signature standout wins that you can get in the conference tournament. So that is a problem. But here's the one that I think that everyone needs to really keep in mind. This happened just yesterday. Just yesterday, the University of Michigan's athletic department, all the athletic programs were suspended by the state health department of Michigan for 2 weeks because the first cases of what people are calling the UK strain of COVID that's more transmissible, the first strains in the state of Michigan were brought in by Michigan athletes, or at least tested by Michigan athletes. So they shut every program down. That's basketball, that's hockey, that's field hockey, whoever. Earlier in the year, let's go back to December, Marion County, Indiana, which is where Indianapolis is located, barred the Gonzaga-Baylor game from happening because Gonzaga had a couple of positive cases within their program. Don't think for 1 second if they could bar that game from happening, that they wouldn't step in and shut things down if they think a team that enters this NCAA bubble for the NCAA tournament shouldn't be playing. And just, the state health department, the county health departments, these guys are going to need to be on board with what the NCAA is saying. So hopefully the NCAA has a plan for that. But the 7 days of negative tests has really opened my eyes in the sense that we could see a lot of fallout from this. We don't know what it's going to be yet, obviously. And the ACC kind of has to hopefully get on board with everyone else and say, hey, guys, I know you guys are going to be mostly into the tournament. Let's make sure that you guys are also involved in the ACC tournament as well for our posterity. But a lot of teams are going to have to make a lot of decisions with regards to this.
Yeah, and here's the thing that I think people aren't necessarily thinking about that is kind of interesting about the potential for good teams opting out of tournaments. And I agree that a fair number of good teams may decide, I'm already in the NCAA tournament. I don't care about the conference tournament. I can't risk catching COVID by traveling to this conference tournament. And so they will opt out. The interesting thing about that is, I believe the conferences still are going to give the automatic bid that they have to the winner of the conference tournament. So there's going to be more possibility perhaps for teams to, get upsets and win their conference tournament because the very best teams in their conference aren't playing. If this happens and we see 10, 15, 20 teams that know they're in the tournament opt out of their conference tournaments, you could see a lot of craziness in those conference tournaments. And there are going to be some conferences, I haven't really looked that much at the West Coast Conference that Gonzaga is in. But if Gonzaga opts out, that may have been a one bid conference. Usually they end up getting one or two. That may have been a one bid conference. Well, they're suddenly going to be a two bid conference because
usually St. Mary's is messing with them in that conference, but it's usually one or the other. Is very rarely both of them.
Right, exactly. So if Gonzaga opts out, that becomes a two bid conference, and there could be other conferences like that where teams opt out. And the conference gets an extra bid as a result. So it could. Right
now in the West Coast Conference, the second best team in the West Coast Conference is BYU, according to KenPom, and they're 47th, which is right in bubble territory. And the next best teams are below where you would consider bubble teams. So that absolutely could be the case. And let's say BYU feels good and Gonzaga feels good, then you have another team that could potentially be stealing bids. So I think there's a lot of gamesmanship that might be going on among different teams and wanting to play versus not playing. We feel like we're in the tournament, that kind of thing.
I don't think this is I don't think it's going to be in a sense where there's just going to be like 50 teams sitting out, right? Because if you get to that point, it's like the NBA draft. Everyone thinks they're a first rounder, but only 30 guys can get taken in the first round. So, but I think this is going to be reserved for those teams. Gonzaga is the one that I think, as you both noted, we need to watch out for because that could, by them opting out, it could give them another bid and knock someone else off of the bubble and crash out of the tournament. But I do think that some of these teams, if you're talking about the ACC or the Big East or the Big Ten, if some of the top teams decide to come out, that will honestly hurt the bottom half or the middle of the tier of the leagues who are trying to beat one of those teams to put that on their resume and tell the NCAA committee, hey, look, we beat Virginia, we beat whoever, like this, we're in the tournament. We should be in the tournament. They won't have that opportunity. And so I think what the conferences are going to need to do is kind of say, hey guys, if we want to get you're in the tournament, but if we want to get 10 teams in the tournament, you got to stick around, and we figure out a way to make sure that you're testing properly. But you got to stick around, because otherwise you're only going to sell off the other, the teams on the bubble over here that would need a win from you or from someone else to get in.
And there continues to be no discussion from the ACC about rescheduling any of the games that have been postponed. You guys haven't seen anything. I haven't seen anything on that front. So
although,
we continue.
Actually, the ACC did something kind of crazy this weekend. It makes sense, but it's kind of crazy. So Pitt was supposed to play BC this weekend, and Wake Forest had the weekend off, and BC couldn't play because of COVID. And so the ACC had Pitt play Wake Forest instead. It was like they just kind of made up a game.
Finally, they're doing something creative with the postponements and the travel.
Yeah, I mean,
they had done that before. I believe UNC and Syracuse had a game. I don't know if it was one that was supposed to be played later on or whatever, but they did have one where UNC was supposed to play somebody, and then they got COVID, and then they just said, no, Syracuse is coming to town now, so you guys play Syracuse. So it's happened a couple times, but it's because, I mean, every team we play, there's more than 3 or 4 COVID cancellations. We have a few ourselves. Like, there's a lot of games mounting up that need to be rescheduled, and there's not a lot of calendar left to reschedule them.
Duke is, I'm telling you guys, I think Duke's never going to play Florida State this season. It's just not going to get scheduled.
I don't know when they could, but yeah. unless they do something where they're like, hey, by the way, all you guys meet in this gym, you guys play a back-to-back. That's not going to happen. So yeah, it's going to be difficult.
All right, let's round out the show today with our Player of the Week picks. It was a tough week for Duke to be picking Players of the Week. So, Jason, I'll come to you first. Give me your Player of the Week in a week where Duke didn't win any games.
So I would have told you coming into Saturday that it would take a terrible game by Jalen Johnson for him not to win Player of the Week, because he was that great against Pittsburgh earlier in the week. But he was not terrible. He was not terrible.
Do we have the Price is Right failure trombone?
I want to be clear. He was not terrible. I just thought that Matthew Hurt was so good, and Matthew Hurt was also fairly good against Pitt. I think when you guys said earlier on the podcast, he had 13-6 against Pitt. He had and that's like a bad game for him. He had 24-8 against Lousville. And I still feel like I need to make up for a couple weeks ago when I did not pick Matthew Hurt when he won National Player of the Week. So I am going with Matthew Hurt this week.
All right, Donald, who you got?
So I can't go Jalen Hurt and I can't go Matthew Johnson. So I'm just going to go with Matthew Hurt because, like Jason said, even though he was off against Pitt, his energy was there. He fought through having a tough game. He also had fewer turnovers than Jalen Johnson did on the week. They both had 0 against Pitt, but they both had a few against who do we play?
Louisville. I know, it's easy to forget.
It's easy to forget. There's just too many games. In a season where we had stretches with no weeks of games, now there's too many. But yes, against Louisville, they both had turnovers. I think the consistency factor, the edge lies with Matthew Hurt, so that's where I'm going.
I'll make it 3 for 3 for Matthew Hurt this week. 6 for 10 from 3. I will take that every week from him. If he wants to go 6 for 10 from 3 every week for the rest of the season, that's a good performance for me. He's Duke's most efficient by far offensive player this year, and has really made defenses key in on him. So I hope that continues.
Can I just say, if I'd known both you guys were going to take Hurt, I would have taken Jalen Johnson.
No. That's not how this works. That's not how this works. You pick the one that's true to your heart. This is not.
Jalen deserves some Player of the Week shout out.
If Jalen does, look, we've talked about him, and if he earns it outright, according to any of us individually, then he will get that honor. And I'm sure he's not moping around his hotel room worrying about it. So let's not feel bad for Jalen Johnson. He has plenty of opportunities to garner useless Player of the Week awards from the DBR podcast. So I think that will do it for us this week. We got a few upset emails this week about the way the team has been playing. So we appreciate those and have been getting back to folks. If you, we
got one from someone who's like, I want to talk about the draft. Who's going to go in the draft? It's time to talk about next year. I'm not there yet.
We still have another 2 months of the season to to get through. So we'll worry about the draft when the time comes. Don't worry. We will do plenty of breakdown of Duke players in the NBA draft. It's all coming. If you do want to get in touch with us and want to ask us anything about what's going on in the season right now, DBR Podcast at gmail.com. That's the best place to get in touch with us. Hopefully one of us gets back to you. I think we've responded to most of the emails that we've gotten so far. If you like the show, please leave us a review. 5 stars, please. Nothing less. 5 stars is really the only review that we're looking for. Although, if you don't like the show, I suppose you can email us and tell us. But 5 stars wherever you listen to or rate podcasts are very much appreciated for us. That will do it for episode 203. I think I'm going backwards. 273 of the Duke Basketball Report podcast. For Donald Wine and for Jason Evans, I am Sam Klein. We will talk to you again this week after Duke plays Georgia Tech. With that, the Duke Band will take us home.